What I've been invited to speak about today is my research in collaborative heroism and the impact of convergence on the social construction of heroism. Convergence, first off, what is it? Well, it isn't confined to smartphones. We often think about convergence as where a smartphone changes to be used as a video camera, or, we can turn it into a flashlight or a gaming device. That's how we often think of convergence, but really convergence is eroding our boundaries and changing the cultural landscape, and with it, human consciousness. It's impacting our mythical landscapes and the archetypal figures within it. And that's what is interesting and fascinating to me, looking at the impact of convergence on the mythical landscape. So we've seen them impact our socializing through Facebook, our dating world with apps like, or programs like OkCupid, the entertainment industry, education, and business. But we often don't think about the ways that they're affecting our consciousness. But indeed, they are. And we can see that because when we look scientifically at chaos theory, we see that even the movement of a butterfly's wings has an impact on one side of the world, affects the weather patterns on another side of the world. But for us, what that means is that every time that we're sending a tweet, we're also setting in motion a ripple effect. One that we've seen has the power to topple dictators and transform our world. Now, if we're toppling dictators and transforming our world, then we're veering into what we have traditionally thought of as an area of heroism. Heroism, defined as a social attribution that is historically, culturally, and situationally determined. And so as our situation has changed due to convergence, it's important to look into seeing how is this impacting our conceptions of heroism. And so the research, when I first began in this area, I was looking into kind of the newest research in this area, which Phil Zimbardo and colleagues were beginning to look at and expand upon with this concept of the heroic imagination. Which is a theoretical construct in which we can begin to look at how heroes are imagined in our classical writings and by the general public. And when we say classical writings nowadays, we could expand that to our cinema and think about what are some of our most popular heroes that are portrayed in cinema. And for the large part, we see a lot of them as superheroes. Some of the blockbusters now are superheroes. So that's one way that our imagination around heroism has changed. Then we have this part of the theory that the perpetuation of the myth of the heroic elect does society a disservice because it prevents the average citizen from considering their own heroic potential. So in the past, we've always thought of the heroic elect as just a small group of people, but maybe if we expand the heroic imagination, we can make room for different types of heroes and heroism. The third aspect of this is that the heroic imagination can be understood as a mindset, a collection of attitudes about helping other people in need, beginning with caring for others in compassionate ways, but also moving towards a willingness to sacrifice or take risks on behalf of others or in defense of a moral cause. This conveys the message that every person has the potential to act heroically. So this, in essence, expands upon the previous concept. And then the fourth construct here is the bold reinterpretation of societal order offered by some social heroes. So in that, we would see like Martin Luther King or Gandhi boldly reinterpreting the way we see society. And often heroism in the past had been thought of as, that you have to, jump in front of someone, risk your life physically. And indeed, that often happens with social heroes. But it doesn't have to happen. So that's what the theory or construct of the heroic imagination is about. And that's what I was looking at when I began to look at that in concert with information and communication technologies. In summary here, basically heroism is one of our humanity's most exalted virtues, and it's surprisingly difficult to define. In some other research that Phil Zimbardo and colleagues did, they found out that when they asked individuals to define heroes, that most people suggested it was an action taken on behalf of another, requiring the risk of life or limb. But when asked to list their heroes, a majority of the respondents placed their parents on the top of the list. And so when they looked further into this, they found that one reason our parents are on the top of the list is because as we mature, our understanding of self-sacrifice matures with us, and as it does, our concept of heroism and the hero evolves. So we do see the hero evolve in our personal lives, and if we look at it from a societal standpoint, we also are seeing it evolve. In information communication technologies, some of the research that's been done in this shows that although a lot of people think that when individuals are using smartphones or taking action online, that they're not doing as much as, for example, someone who's out marching in the streets for change. What the researchers found is that actually the individuals who are participating in online initiatives are more likely to take meaningful action than non-social media activists, and that they're 2 times as likely to volunteer and participate in events and walks than non-social media cause promoters. They're 5 times more likely than non-social media cause promoters to recruit others to, for example, sign a petition for a cause. And they're 4 times more likely to ask others to contact their political representatives. They're 3 times more likely to request others to donate. So actually, their use of technology isn't limited to using technology. They're using technology and they're marching and recruiting and donating. So that was an important point at which I began to look at, well, in this prevailing mythos, again, we so much think about heroism as risk of life and limb that one reason that we haven't looked, that this isn't a huge area of research right now is because it's hard for us to think about heroism being associated with doing something such as pressing buttons on a keyboard or, messing with your smartphone. And that instead of the lone hero facing like a seething dragon, the cyber incarnation exists within this interactive matrix. So even if one person does something, they're actually never doing it alone because the internet itself is a complex system of interactions that only can stay in existence because of the actions of many. So this expands our idea of the traditional concepts of heroism if we think about that actions online are actually collaborative actions. And so in the past, we might have thought of, the lone hero solving a challenge, but in our complex world today, we have these, global challenges, and right now a lot is going on with the Sustainable Development Goals, even as we speak, with the big meeting at the United Nations. So when we look at the changing face or the evolution of heroism, we're also looking at that in the context of solving some of these global challenges. And although it may be difficult to believe, in fact, we'll look at a few of these. So information communication technologies and forms of civil heroism. So normally we think of civil heroism as firefighters and rescue people going out to rescue people who have gotten into a dangerous situation. And actually, not so long ago, we may remember the Flight 370 Malaysian flight went down. And what happened was millions of people around the world wanted to participate in that. And a website was launched to enable people to go online and actually search for parts of the airplane and or anything that they could find to help the efforts. So this is an example of a collaborative form of heroism in which many people are trying to find these passengers on this plane. Another example of a form of social heroism is seen in Aves.org. It's the world's largest and most powerful online activist network with over 28 million members. And what they do is launch campaigns and rally community around various changes. We're going to see one or two as we go. But before we do that, we're going to look at the peace and conflict resolution, which is another of the global challenges. And we see an example of this in the Koenig campaign that was launched in 2012, in which millions, again, 3.7 million people pledged their support to efforts to arrest Joseph Koenig, who, is a very cruel leader of the Lord's Resistance Army. And they had a lot of success, actually. 2 of the Lord's Resistance Army commanders were removed from the battlefield. 5 LRA surrendered due to some flyers that were put out, again, based on this campaign. The Congress in the United States authorized a $5 million reward for information leading to his arrest. And many, many other implications due to this one campaign, which again is a collaborative effort to stop this particular person from continuing to kidnap, rape, and torture. Another example of collaborative heroism is with internet mixed with health issues. So Fold It is one of the examples that's often given. It's an online kind of a game where players or participants fold proteins, and they've actually had quite a bit of success in searching for cures to various illnesses based on this particular endeavor. Sometimes we hear of this talked about as citizen science, but actually if it leads to solving finding clues to how we might find cures for intractable diseases, then that is a heroic example. Is using this collaborative efforts to eradicate extreme hunger. There's many more examples than those I'm giving, but due to time, the one that I've selected here was one of the very first games called Food Force, and what it did was it teamed up the World Food Program in order to create a game where people who played actually ended up delivering food around the world. Another example where the environment is concerned is some of the campaigns that have been launched by Greenpeace as well as World Wildlife Fund. And in this case, they got Procter & Gamble to stop their policies that endangered orangutans and the Sumatran tiger in the Indonesian rainforest. So this was a huge victory. Again, that only took place because we had millions around the world voicing their opposition. Another one of our global challenges is empowering women. And this is a small example, but I think a good one. This Julia Bloom is a teenager that she created an online petition at change.org, another one of the large petition sites, asking 17 magazine to at least commit to printing one unaltered real photo spread per month. In other words, to stop photoshopping, airbrushing the images of the models, because her concern as a high school student was that she and her friends were often, led to want to look like those women who in fact don't really look like that themselves. And she felt that this kind of photoshopping leads to eating disorder, dieting, radical dieting, depression, and low self-esteem. And because of her petition being launched, actually 17 magazine not only agreed to her request, but they went a step beyond it and committed not to alter the body size or face shape of the girls and models in the magazine. And this is because of the act of one young woman. So this is one way that information communication technologies are empowering and changing the status of women in the world. Another example here with global ethics is this was due to the AVEZ organization that I mentioned briefly before. They have a lot of campaigns that they run. And this was one campaign in which this young man fled to Germany to get treatment for leukemia. And after the operation saved his life, the government wanted to send him back to Russia, and his classmates started a petition on their community AVEZ site, and basically ended up having the local government stop the deportation. And these are fifth graders. So again, it's empowering not only women, but also young people. So because of this research, I started theorizing that we're seeing the evolution of heroism right now, and it's a collaborative form. And what it really amounts to is that where traditional concepts of heroism are closely associated with acts of bravery involving risk of life or limb, this theory suggests that collaborative heroism is more closely associated with a variety of character strengths and virtues, including compassion and perseverance in the face of injustice. Although risk to life and limb does happen, it's more readily understood to be species-wide rather than individual. So in other words, individuals engaging in this form of heroism are looking at risks to our species instead of to themselves. And heroic action is defined as action aimed at achieving noble goals that are defined as the tenets of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So finally, some empirical research that I did ended up supporting this theory, and we found that the consensus among the participants indicated that collaboration expands heroic potential, that internet technology expands heroic potential, that heroes are motivated to serve and protect, and they are responsive to injustice, and concern for justice is a required ingredient. So that is the research that I have been engaging in and continue to look at now. Hi.
Excellent. Thank you, Dana. Very, very, very interesting. I'd like to open it up to the group for questions, comments.
Please.
Discussion.
Hi, thank you again, Dana, for taking the time out to do this. That was awesome.
Thank you, Tanisha.
A couple of the notes that I jotted down that I thought were super important were the keys you said to ICTs, like the information and communication tech, but which is the lack of risk and the ease of engagement.
Yes.
I really see those as being so crucial to even things that are kind of related, like corporate social responsibility, making sure that those two things are within like the user experience that will kind of entice people and bait them into doing something beyond themselves, like donating and doing these kind of heroic acts. And when you brought up the example of the food force, that
yes.
Can you explain that one a little bit more and how the style of gamification like played into that? I missed a little bit of it. I grabbed a coffee.
Well, Food Force was one of the very first games that was created in this area, and there's been others now and continuing. Games for Change, probably the most well-known organization that promotes games that do have the potential to effect change in the world. But Food Force was one in which the players were actually having to move move food from one area to the next, and then as they were doing it, contributions were being made so that the World Food Program was able to ship food to those in need. That's how that one worked.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Because at that point, it's like they're through their participation, they're also getting some enjoyment out of this through like that gamification style. You know what I mean? And
exactly. And in some cases, I mean, I didn't mention a whole lot about it, because in general, a lot of these actions, people are not risking life or limb, but it isn't true that in all cases that's the way it is. So it really depends upon the situation. And Phil Zimbardo talks a lot about that as far as the hero and also our capacity for evil. In some of his, particularly the Stanford prison experiment, he found that, the situation we're in makes a big difference as to how we act, even though we might not think it will until we're in that particular situation. And so with this collaborative heroism, there are people living in parts of the world where, the internet censorship and monitoring is just commonplace. And so if they send a tweet against their government or, someone in power, or, write a blog post or engage in any number of activities that wouldn't put us in the United States at risk necessarily, but in that situation, in that country, for that person doing that does create a risk of imprisonment and potentially even death. And so the people acting in support of that person, for example, retweeting or reposting the blog, then they are themselves, joining in that act of collaborative heroism, and they're also joining into the fact that they may find themselves in with some penalties or endangered. So it's not that this particular form of heroism has none of that around it. It just really does depend on the situation that the person finds themselves in.
Right. That's true. I instantly also thought of the ice bucket challenge.
Yes, that's another great example.
I instantly thought of that, and through not only like the group membership and creating like this sense of well-being, like you start challenging your friends and stuff like that, and you get that collaborative effort, and we're using technology as kind of like that little nut and bolt sewing all of us together. And it also reminded me there's a program going on right now called Water Boys, where certain teams of the NFL are starting to take pictures of what they're drinking on bottles of water, Gatorade, whatever, and they're challenging the other teams to donate money to provide clean water in certain regions of Africa. And a few players in the off season have gone over there and have started to create water wells and things like that. And so now that the season has just started, it's actually getting that ice bucket feel, because one team has raised X amount, another team is challenging and inviting their fans to start tweeting pictures and doing things like, okay, this is what I'm drinking, and at the same time donate water to provide clean water to Africa. So it's so broad, and it can be used in so many different ways, like you said, where there can be risk and penalties involved when you're responding to messages that might have some sort of political influence behind it, depending on what side of the fence you're on. And then it can be totally fun and freezing. And I remember watching Jerry Lynn's video. She actually did it and put it on Facebook with her getting drenched with ice water.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a wonderful example, and one that I have used in the past, because it the whole goal is let's raise enough money to do research in order to end this, illness, and that now we have a chance to all participate in it if we want to.
Right.
And, in the past that wasn't, there certainly wasn't a way to do an ice bucket challenge and spread it around through all of your social networks and potentially help, find a cure. So,
Totally.
yeah.
So Dana, we have a question from Hannah, and she asked, you've addressed collaborative heroism, but what about collaborative villainy? As much as there is the opportunity to do and be good through technology, is there a similar opportunity to do bad? One of the things that people are warned about when engaging online through social media is to never read the comments because it can be hurtful or threatening.
Well, that's a very good point, and it's a very well-studied area. Most of the time we talk about that in terms of cyberbullying, cyber stalking, cyber crime, and within, the APA and other areas of research or research bodies, many scientists are studying the impact of the internet, the negative impact of the internet. I personally, that's one reason I got into looking at what about the positive side, because so much of the research being done was looking at the negative impact. And my background and training is from transpersonal and humanistic psychology and positive psychology. So all of that predisposed me to want to look and say, okay, cyberbullying is going on. E-philanthropy is one of the only positive, at that time when I started that research, and that's at least 10 years ago, there just wasn't a conversation around the positive use of the internet other than e-philanthropy. So in other words, the internet was making it easier for people to donate money. One of the first was through an app that was created, like text this number, and then that would result in a donation. And they found that actually increased the donations astronomically. And so what I first started was to look and see, okay, what else is going on good online that is not directly associated with someone giving their own money. So in other words, what kind of acts of kindness and altruism were going on. And so that was my first research, was in the area of digital altruism. And that research is what led to me to look a little bit further. And there's kind of a fine line between altruism and heroism. And traditionally, that line has been defined kind of at the point where that risk of life and limb came in. And once I started to look deeper into this expansion of the heroic imagination that Phil Zimbardo and his colleagues were talking about, I began to entertain this theory that perhaps we are seeing an evolution of heroism, but it's just very hard to see because, it's a hard thing for us to change because it's something that we inherit our ideas about. And so it was kind of hidden from view. But yes, there is a lot of negativity that is online. People need to take the proper precautions and protect themselves. But at the same time, I believe they need to know that just as there's an antithesis or an opposite to everything in life, there is an opposite to that form of behavior. And until we give names to something, then we just don't have a way to talk about it. It doesn't actually exist until we name it. And so thus, my first research was in the cyber hero archetype. And then that led me to this research in collaborative heroism, because I began to recognize that, the online activity was backed up by all of the activity of the people in the streets. And so oftentimes it's people, while they're marching in the streets, for example, are texting, they are tweeting, they are sharing on social media. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. And in this way, the collaboration is exponentially, growing.
Thank you, Jane. We have a couple more. Tatiana raised her hand. Tatiana, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, thank you for this really excellent presentation. I actually did not know anything about collaborative heroism, and it's amazing to see the application from a public health perspective too. I was wondering what weight, in terms of the strength of the evidence and the power of influence, does collaboration hold when compared to other factors?
I'm sorry, to other what?
For instance, internet technology. Other factors.
Okay.
Such as internet technology, motivation of heroes, etc.
I'm not sure I understood your question. Can you try it one more time?
Yeah, I was wondering how does collaboration weigh in terms of the evidence when compared to, for instance, internet technology? When we talk about collaborative heroism, internet technology weighs first more than the motivation of heroes, or is it the motivation of heroes that weighs more than internet technology as a driver for the collaborative heroism?
I think I understand what you're saying, and I think the answer to that is both. They both go together the same way. I mean, I think that's the convergence in a nutshell. That the same way that we can pick up our smartphone and it can be anything. Well, not anything, but it can be multiple things to us. It can play our music, record our videos, become our flashlight, etc. That it's this type of convergence of things coming together that enable this form of heroism. So it's the people are motivated. I do believe that they are motivated to tackle global challenges, and that they recognize that the type of challenges we're facing are not challenges that can be solved by one individual. And it just so happens that we now have the internet technology, and so that the people who are motivated to take action have a tool that enables them to take action, and to feel empowered that they might be able to actually make a difference because they're not acting alone, because they're acting in concert with others. Because I do think that many of the people taking action recognize that we're living in a time where to make the changes we need to make, for example, to tackle climate change, we're going to have to do that as a huge group of people, and only in that way will we really be able to affect change. So I think it's the motivation of the person in tandem with this new technology that we have. So I hope that answered what you were looking for.
Yeah, I was just wondering, as a follow-up, is there like a convergence matrix that you look at how each factor interplays with the other in order to exhibit this collaborative heroism?
Well, I haven't looked at that. I mean, I haven't conducted research in that area, but it's something that I would really encourage other researchers to begin looking at. I mean, this is just a totally new area, and I have done some empirical research in it, but it's just tiny, like scratch the surface, and so we need to get it out there and start having other people think about it and expand upon the research and conduct studies like what you're thinking about, I believe.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Dana, we have a follow-up question from Hannah, and she asked about, oops, it just slid on me. What about the relevance of time and how that plays into collaborative heroism? Tanisha brought up the Ice Bucket Challenge.
Mm-hmm.
That was an example of a phenomenon for 2014, just like Connie was very much indicative of 2012-13.
So what does time, as in how much time a person takes to engage in that action? Is that the question? Or which activities going on in which year? Or, I mean, more specific?
Since she typed it, I don't have a specific, if you can follow up, Hannah, that would be, she said rather the temporariness of an event.
Okay. I think that's a great question, and I think it's important to go back and look at some of the results that some of these organizations have had to recognize that even though a campaign might be temporary, the results of that campaign continue on. So let's stay with the Ice Bucket Challenge, for example. The funds raised and the awareness, because again, it's not just about money, it's about that before that, very few people even knew, about ALS. So I think now the awareness has been raised and the more funds have been raised, and so more research is going on, and that it's a little bit hard to quantify as far as the importance of awareness being raised, but definitely they can quantify where the dollars are going. And then as time goes by, we can see what research comes out of it. So although the campaign was short-lived, the results of it are ongoing. And, let's just be more optimistic. Let's just say this year, next time they find a cure. That wasn't found next year this time. It was actually found due to all of these people participating in the campaign, raising the funds, and the ongoing nature of the campaign through the research that the scientists are conducting in order to get to that point to find that cure. So although it looks like a short-lived thing, in many, many cases, these campaigns have what you might say a long shelf life.
So another question for you. This comes from Nan Powell. Thank you, Dana and Jerry Lynn, for this webinar presentation. I appreciate the importance of positive psychology and moral lens on media use and consumption. Great examples of collaborative heroism. I also enjoy hearing about how the collaborative heroism theory sidesteps network news in that people are seeing problems, needs, and responding immediately from what they are recognizing in the moment. As in your example of the Malaysian airline event, I am focusing on something similar in terms of moral and motivation potential from indie films. Now that's where she ends, so I'm assuming she wants you to speak to indie films if you can.
There's a lot of indie films that are being made that are really helping to raise and change, raise awareness, change consciousness. One of the most important things about making those films is to really define your audience and to try to create the film in such a way that you reach the audience that you want to reach. Some of the, I guess you couldn't really put them into the indie category anymore, but participant media, which was the production house that did Inconvenient Truth, and they've gone on to do a lot of other films. I would have said they kind of started as an indie area, and what they did was they built digital campaigns into their film campaigns, so that they actually, once they enabled someone to know or rose awareness about an issue, but they also gave people a way to take action on that issue. So I would say that that's an important thing to do. Whatever independent film a person is making, if they're seeking to create change in the world, then they should create some form of a digital campaign around it. And now, since everything is moving towards, watching things online, that's very easy to do. So it's not a huge challenge in the way it might have been, years ago.
Thank you. Both Hannah and Nan said thank you, that you helped clear up a lot of their questions. Yeah. Do we have questions from anyone else? Or any additional questions? So, Dana, can you think of anything that we should have asked you?
No, I can't think of anything. I'm sure there's many things we haven't covered, and I guess the only thing I would, say in wrap up is that there are so many campaigns, being launched now, and that this is really a growing form of heroism in the world. And although it's not in popular culture yet as a term, I believe that, it will be. And again, these things are slow to change, but some of the research in mythology by Joseph Campbell, he talked about how when we made the journey to the moon, that changed everything, because it was the first time we were able to look back at the Earth at a distance, and it opened up consciousness in a way that we're still seeing the effects of. And so I think that the internet is another one of the outcomes of, our journey to the moon, in the sense that we were building technologies in order to take that journey, and then those technologies finally become mainstream. And although we are using the technologies, the psychological and mythological components of it are sometimes harder to see because we're the ones looking. I mean, so I guess just keep looking for these campaigns, keep participating in them, and help to raise awareness of the fact that we can use the internet in this positive way, because I think it's very empowering, particularly to a young generation who may feel a little bit helpless at times. They often hear us adults talk about the challenges, and that we have 300 tigers left, and that the polar bears are dying, and feel a little helpless, but that if they recognize that they can take action, at least they feel a sense of empowerment that is important for their psychological growth and maturity.
Awesome. Dana, can I just ask you one last thing?
Sure.
There's a lot of students here that I'm sure will come up with extra questions after the fact, like I have. I was taking 100 notes. Is it okay if we contact you over email after this?
Yes,
Awesome.
please.
Can you type it in the chat window?
I sure can.
Thank you so much.
And Tanisha, you might want to send something out to the listserv, because I'm not sure that, it is popping up. I'm not sure that folks that are watching the recording later on will be able to see the chat window, but right now it just popped up, so that's good.
Also, if there's anyone listening who wants to contact me with questions, I can be reached through my website. I have a place there where people can contact me, and also I'm on Twitter. So send me a tweet with a question, or follow, and you can send me a message. So there's lots of ways to reach out.
Well, I want to thank you as the president of Division 46, the Society for Media Psychology and Technology. It's really been an honor and pleasure to have you here with us today, and we appreciate you taking the time out from your busy schedule to share this really exciting work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.